Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final student dialogue of season 2 of Literature Across Borders. My name is Megha, and I co founded this initiative with Dr. Alexia Casal, who's the course leader of the MA Writing for Young People program at Spa University. Our partners in India are Ashoka University and the Green Literature Festival. Uh, Literature Across Borders is a transnational literary exchange program where we pair thematically related books for young people to understand how authors in different cultural contexts are approaching similar themes. In today's dialogue, we're going to be discussing Yuvan Aves, A Naturalist's Journal, and Dara McAnulty's A Diary of a Young Naturalist. I'm going to make a quick intro to the students who are participating in the dialogue. Um, Sakshi Nadkarni is a MA student at the Ashoka University. She is a reader, a writer, a seeker who likes to work with bhakti poetry and eco-poetics. Sakshi has read Dara's book for this dialogue. We have John Gilmore, who is pursuing the Master's Writing for Young People at Spa University. John writes whimsical and nature inspired picture books, early reader, rhyming verse, and weird and wacky middle grade prose. The dialogue for today is being moderated by Dharani Dhavamani. Dharani is an alumnus of the Young India Fellowship at Ashoka University. She is currently working on a project that explores the natural and culinary heritage of India. So, with that, Dharani, I'm going to hand over the dialogue to you to ask the questions for the day.
Thank you, Megha. Thank you so much for the introductions. Hi, Sakshi. Hi, John. It's quite exciting for me to be on this side of the session because last year I was one of the participants and it was very exciting to have the exchange for the first time. So it's really, I'm looking forward to this. And compared to the previous edition, this edition also adds a new layer because these are non-fiction books. The books that we had read last time were fictions, and it was set in a place where the geography of the area and also the fiction sort of like came together and wove like a very nice story. But this time it's non-fiction book where people have used their own personal experiences, be it in terms of the difficulties or their relationship with nature, how very observant they are. So that is something that's added like a much fresh perspective, and it'll be even more interesting to listen to both of your ideas and takeaways from reading the sections of the books and how you related it with your own personal experiences, even if you're coming from a specific geographical region and the book stems from elsewhere. So I think this exchange is going to be quite fruitful that way. So I think we can get started with the first preliminary question. This is something that I think is like the most obvious question, but it's also a very important one. So, according to the both of you, what was the most noticeable or a clear way in which the book that you read was similar or different from the nature books that are written in your country? So, I think we can start with John.
Yeah, well, I love the philosophical reflections and humor that came through in Yuvan's style, um, the anecdotal nature of his essay writing, and his storytelling skills, combined with his knowledge and experience, made for a really rich reading experience. I think that potentially sets him apart from the mainstream naturalist literature we have here. And both Yuvan and Dara have very young voices. I think Dara was 14 or 15 when he wrote
14,
his.
yeah,
Yuvan was early 20s, maybe. Would that be correct?
around 20, yes.
Um, I think that level of childhood enthusiasm is generally more restrained and metered by adult naturalist writers. So, yeah, I just like the excitement and joy in the writing. Actually, I think Dara states that he has no joy filter. So there's an exuberance and vibrancy in the writing. Similarly with Yuvan as well. they really capture the excitement of experiencing nature firsthand as a young person. And yeah, I think I need to mention too that Dara spent his childhood in my own native County Fermanagh, which you can probably tell from my accent. So it was really cool to see places and wildlife that I'm familiar with on the page, as there's a scarcity of Northern Irish naturalists in general, and again, especially young voices. Um, so yeah, I think I recognised a lot of the Irish lilt and lyricism in Dara's conversational prose, and I also loved the Irish mythological elements and the elements of philosophy that Yuvan brought to his style as well were really cool.
Wonderful. I think that's a very cute comparison of both of the authors and their understanding of the space. So in a way, I think we get to experience these things through their eyes and also for our own selves, right? Specifically when you're talking about Dara, because you must have seen a lot of these things yourselves, but not articulated it in the way in which he has. So that's quite interesting. So then, Sakshi, because you've read Dara's book, but you may not have actually seen the flora and fauna in the way in which probably John has, because he's read both of the books. So, what would your take on this be?
Honestly, I have to confess that I haven't read much young adult memoir style eco-critical writing from India. So I don't know how well I'll be able to answer this question. But I have read adult eco-critical memoirs specifically. I have two here. This is a collection of essays by Shumona Roy, which is called How I Became a Tree. And there's this memoir of Ruskin Bonds, which is called The Beauty of All My Days. And I think across all of these three texts, there was a similarity of tone that I picked up on, which somehow combines the urgency of the climate crisis with the reflectivity and slowness of the subjective experience that you have with and of nature. And Shimona's book often draws on cultural artifacts. For instance, the work of, you might have heard of Rabindranath Tagore, who is the only literature Nobel laureate that India has produced, and also Jagdish Chandra Bose, and so a lot of other culturally important people. And she talks a lot about how they have drawn from nature, but Bond's writing, like Dara's, is far more simple and immediate, and it focuses, I think, more on the momentary and the more fleeting joys afforded by a life spent with nature. And I think across all three books there was a similarity of themes as well: the healing power of nature, the the connections between solitude and nature, and so on. And I also feel like all of these books had a specific effect on me. Like they created a similar mood for me, a mood of peace and quiet and repose and introspection. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. That sort of also, I think, functions as a segue to my next question. So I think we would have found interesting moments here and there which are a little unexpected. So then, what, according to the both of you, were the most fascinating creatures, or we can even keep it to one. So what's the most fascinating creature that you came across while you read the book, which otherwise is overlooked?
Oh,
I guess, John. Yes.
that's a really hard question. There's so many
So
wonderful
many.
creatures
Yeah.
in both of these books. Oh, I really enjoyed Dara's catalogue of creatures like the Hooper Swans and Hen Harriers, but I think obviously I was more fascinated in Yuvan's descriptions because a lot of the creatures were unfamiliar to me. So it was nice to
Right.
discover new species. I think probably I found the mating display antics of the Indian ruler bird really fascinating.
Hmm.
A lot of that might be down to Yuvan's comical description of their antics. Um, I think he says they're a silent and solitary bird most of the year, but yeah, and maybe he calls them a hermit in the hills.
Yeah.
But when meeting time comes, uh, they have this alter
They're
ego
like,
where they start
yeah.
constantly looping around like maniacs and screeching till they drive all the other birds crazy. So that was just a really cool bit of behavior to find out about and overlooked. I think maybe just to quickly mention smaller creatures too. he talks about the symbiotic relationship between, I think it's bully ants and the caterpillar of the
Caterpillar.
grand blue butterfly.
Yeah, yeah.
Really cool because the caterpillars don't have their own kind of defenses like toxicity or camouflage. So they enlist bully ants as like sentry soldiers to protect them against things like parasitic wasps. And the payoff is that they secrete this kind of honeydew to feed those ants and keep them enlisted as their troops. So I mean that was just a really cool little community symbiosis going on there that I would have had no clue about. So that was cool to read about.
Yeah, that's I think like I think both of the examples were wonderful. One's is something that flies, and the other one is like a thing that quite often overlooked. I think both of them are overlooked. So with at least we, I think even though we're from here, we don't quite notice the symbiotic relationship between the ants and the caterpillar. So that's I think now when we head out, we'll have a specific like look out for can we see what he is written about. So that definitely is quite interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Sakshi.
So in Dara's entry on the 6th of December, he describes in exquisite detail and with such wonderful lyricism the song of the sparrows. And not only did this diary entry make me smile a very wide and toothy smile, but it also made the otherwise very distant landscape of the book feel closer to home for me, because sparrows in Bombay are very banal, very mundane birds. They're not exotic or colorful or particularly melodious birds, and they are, if you like, the archetype of the bird. So they're very easy to reduce to a category. But I think Dara fleshes them out with such beauty, and he really observes and describes the minuscule, aspects of their bodies and lives. And I really appreciated that. And I think there's also a spiritual quality to this that gave me a lot of strength and joy. That no matter how trivial I feel in the face of adversity, and no matter how small I feel, and how I feel like I pale before the vibrancy and talent of those around me, I have a purpose and I belong, just like Dara sparrows. And I think, yeah, that's my big takeaway from this.
Yeah, yeah. That's I think this example is something that is a little different from what John mentioned because you have sparrows across both the spaces, but it's also similar because you are aware of things, but you're not quite aware of things.
Yeah.
And I guess the difference in the geography of the place and where we are from is also quite significant. So it might seem that most of the species which are written about or described are overlooked because you don't know them, you haven't quite seen them. And that sort of like brings me on to the next question of the fiction versus non-fiction element. So how are we looking at the interesting qualities of non-fiction books when we compare them to that of fiction books, specifically under the category of environmental literature? Because we are trying to see how in fiction books you do have qualities of like surrealism or magical elements and how extraordinary some of the characters and the plot points are. But when you come to nature and how nature is being described, like both of you also very beautifully said, you're able to pick things from the mundane and trying to understand and appreciate how nature itself is magical. So it sort of blurs a lot of boundaries between fiction and non-fiction. But even then, because one category is of experiences of people and the other one is pure fiction, which is inspired or not. So then, how is it that you would compare between these two, or do you even think that a comparison is warranted when it comes to environmental literature?
I think for me, the most interesting quality is that the magic in these books is real. There are things as spectacular, if not more so, in nature that the human imagination can't actually conjure up. And the unbridled joy when the author sees something wondrous and lyrical, the lyrical descriptions of them are just amazing. And it's real. That's the crucial part of that too. Like some of the descriptions and imagery of the animals that Yuvan creates are so fantastic. Like the oleander hawk moth is just like such a bizarre and wonderful creature. the vast rainbows of butterfly migrations that he describes are just dazzling. It's like fiction, and it's like crazy imagination, but it's real. So I think that's brilliant. Um, I guess in nonfiction, the message of conservation and the need for action in the face of a global environmental and existential crisis comes across really well because it's in a real world setting. So simply by recording and illuminating what's actually happening to the natural world right now, these books show the need for action without a lot of didactic discourse to young readers, which you sometimes get in fiction. Um, I guess it's very much show not tell in that respect. So they are showing the harsh realities recorded and recounted. They're not just stories about the reality. Although undoubtedly there's environmental power in green fiction as well, but I just think um, the reality-based account is just so powerful because it's a truth, and it's a truth that can't be ignored.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's brilliantly put because you're experiencing what they're writing in a lot of sense. So it's like it functions as a mirror, and you don't necessarily have to read in between the lines because it's staring right at your face. So I think that's a very helpful way to distinguish these book genres, and also emphasizes on why we have to discuss or talk about it. Uh, Thanks again. Yeah, Sakshi.
I think this is a very interesting question, and I think that fiction makes space for imagining alternate possibilities and, accommodates what we think as outside the realm of empirical reality, like you said. But also with fiction, we are more likely to dismiss these elements as fantastical, and um,
Mhm.
but with nonfiction, we're forced, especially environmental nonfiction, we're forced to confront that non-human elements and non-anthropocentric elements are perhaps beyond the realm of our understanding of reality. And we're apt to read more nonfiction with, I think, a slight more seriousness because we give it the weight of human experience. And um, I think that's why environmental writing in specific, like you said, it breaches the boundaries between fiction and nonfiction because it allows for a far more literary or lyrical expression of things than, say, self-help or academia or other genres of nonfiction do. And at the same time, it also makes space for themes and events that belong to the realm of fiction. So all the while, I think also that it lends a sort of earnestness of form that elevates the urgency of its political project. So I think, yeah, that's my answer.
Right. Yeah. Wonderful. And Sakshi, so you also in one of the previous points that we were discussing, you sort of compared between say Shimona's book and also Dara's book, and you tried to see how they're like similar or different. Because we're familiar, or you're familiar with a lot of the Indian names and descriptions, because you might have seen the pictures or seen the creatures in real life. But then that doesn't quite apply to Dara's book, if I'm not wrong. Like I don't know if you've been to Ireland. Okay, yeah. So comparing that with the non-fiction nature of the book, did it still seem like non-fiction, or was it still fiction in your head because you actually haven't seen the things?
That's such an interesting question. I feel like, first of all, this whole question of form and of genre is a little iffy to me, because to me, for instance, reading a lot of the romantic poetry that I studied in my bachelor's degree felt very alien to me, because here was John Keats talking about all of these specific kinds of birds and trees that are just not around me. I don't see them around me. I can't relate to them. But there
Yeah.
is like, and I think that here there's a lot of similarity between poetry and memoir or environmental
Mhm.
memoirs, basically. Is
Mhm.
that the source of it is so similar, that it stems from some instinct that connects you to nature, that lies embedded in all of us, no matter where we are situated in time and space. which is why I'm able to appreciate romantic poetry, which was written in the 1800s or 1900s. Sorry, not 1900s, 1800s, in a place that is so far away from my home. And that's also the reason I'm able to not just appreciate, but perhaps even empathize with what Dara said. So, yeah, like the specific aspects of nature are different, and that's the reason they create so much fascination for me. But at the same time, there is something in it that feels close to home. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense because I think the bit that you said about not quite being able to relate to, say, Keith's poem or Wordsworth's poem because they're away from what we are used to is something that I think most of the Indian students have faced. But then, in a lot of sense, when you visit those places, then I think it sort of clicks. Like you're like, oh, now I know
Yeah.
why Keats wrote, why he wrote what he wrote. And then, in that sense, John, because you've read both the books, Dara's and Yuvan's, and you're also familiar with Dara's like meat in terms of the flora, fauna, or even the geographical space itself. So, how do you view this bifurcation of like the categories?
Um, I think there's just an interconnectedness, really. There's like the universal truth of experience in nature, and whether it's something you've done yourself or through the eyes of someone else, it's kind of like you recognize the experience, the awe, and like the curiosity and the discovery. So, like when I was reading a lot of Yuvan's writing, I wasn't aware of the creatures, but I really related to how he described them and how he felt about them. So I guess there's a truth in the experience that you can still empathize with even if you haven't seen the creature, and it's nice to
Yeah.
know that they do exist and I can go and see them as well. Um, so yeah, I just think that there's like um, that innate experience of nature that will be kind of universal wherever you are and whatever you're watching.
Yeah, I think both of you sort of put it out in very in nice, perfect way because we are trying to see how books which are describing things that are hyper local are sort of universal because of the emotions that it evokes through that. So that was quite wonderful, and I think we're all here sitting discussing about these books and reading these books and are relating to it at a very emotional level also because we're passionate about the environmental crisis or environmental literature and things associated with it. So these books are subtle, but they clearly articulate how real the situation is in the face of climate change. So, how do they contribute to your already existing understanding of the Anthropocene, be it with respect to the beauty and strength or adaptability of the nature, or its fragility and vulnerability, and how interconnected it is to the human world?
In his essay "Hopes for a Vanishing Marshland," Yuvan outlines the abundance of wildlife facing the destruction of marshlands near Chennai to
Yeah.
make way for urban construction. And he also talks about the human waste it brings in the form of sewage and rubbish to landfill. Um,
Hmm.
then, after I think is it the heaviest monsoon in a century in 2015, which was brought
Yeah.
on by climate change, he alludes to the floods where over 500 people died and over 1,000 people were left homeless, which is just tragic. Um, Sadly, the marshland was a natural flood sink and would have helped to abate that disaster potentially. So Yuvan gives us a very philosophical response to this in a Krishnan quote. I haven't read Krishnan, but after this quote, I want to read. Um, he says, "When one is hurting nature, one is hurting oneself." I think that's very profound. There's a subtlety in it without becoming too in your face. So yeah, I just like the power in that. And I'm also thinking of Dara's first trip to Rathlin. He observes a plethora of really wonderful seabirds, but he also notices a grey seal in the harbour, which is injured by a shard of plastic. And that combined with he has an experience where I think an RSPB officer takes them to see a project where they're trying to reinstate the corn crake on the island, but there's only one male, and it cries and cries and cries and doesn't get a response, which is a really sad and poignant moment for him. So I think possibly after those two things, I've got a little quote here where he says, nowhere escapes human intervention. There is loss everywhere, loss of habitat, loss of species and ways of life. I mean, that just sums up a lot of the tragedy of this and the Anthropocene and just its inevitability in a way. I think that his frustration possibly leads him to become more active. He talks about writing not being enough, and he takes a more active role in conservation. I think he actually reads a poem he's written called Anthropocene at a rally in London. So that's, I guess that's not the most subtle example, but
Couldn't be more direct. Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely true. And right now I'm in Chennai, where Yuvan's book is based. So when he's talking about 2015 and when the book came out in 2017, and now it's 7 years, but the situation is a lot similar, if not worse, with a lot of things.
Oh, no.
So you're living a lot of these things, and it's across the world, if not just across the country, or even the state, or just the city. So I think there are like a lot of layers where if while reading, if it can change us or move us, which it does, it really can play a profound role in like changing things or ways in which things are seen, or like policies and the points that both of them also really talk about. And Sakshi, about Dara's.
Yeah, so I think there's something about the very form of a memoir that we talked about that a little bit before, and I think it makes space for the subjective, right? I think hard numbers and statistics and facts that populate the pages of environmental nonfiction and environmental academia don't quite hit home the way personal narratives do. Right. In recording our personal encounters with nature, I think environmentalism, which has historically been associated with science, it just makes that more immediate and more soulful and more significant to us, because the I in these narratives sort of reminds us that we and our individual lives are implicated in the web of the ecosystem, and that the climate crisis is not a crisis that is far away from us in time and space, and we have a personal connection to the world around us. And like John said, like hurting the nature is hurting your own self. And I feel like I said before, I'm very different as a person from Dara, and I'm also very different in my socioeconomic, cultural, geographic background, and I still feel a sense of solidarity with him. And I do feel like where political activism doesn't work, very often these personal accounts of affective experiences that you've had with nature help. And I feel like activism can't reach everywhere, but these narratives do, and I think there's immense power in those narratives.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very well said when you said activism doesn't, but narrative does. And I think that's the essence that we get from the books. And thank you for that. I'll probably borrow that somewhere in the future. And with, I think now I can also move a little bit about the authors, because I think both of them are wonderful people in terms of who they are and what they do, how they see things and how they say things. And they not only keep it to themselves, but try to spread as much of their curiosity and their generosity and their passion about like nature or conservation. And it comes quite naturally to them, and it's very inspirational. And I think a lot of the credit goes to their parents and the mentors. So what do you think this says about their role as in role of parents and mentors or teachers in creating a generation which is resilient in the face of the environmental havoc that is happening all around us? Because these guys also not only learn from them, but they're also passing it on, be it in terms of Yuvan, where he's a teacher who's teaching things or specifically building curriculum or fighting for it, or in the case of Dara, where he's trying to find spaces where he can express it, even if it is very, very difficult for him to do so, where he has to really come outside his comfort zone in order to get his point across. So, what do you feel about the role of such people, and what can we learn from them, or how we can imbibe some of those elements? We'll start with John.
I think these people, parents, mentors, authors, are both a guiding light and a beacon of safety for young readers. Um, Dara describes his family being as close as a family of otters. Um, that's such a lovely image. I wish I was in a family of otters. Um, his mother is also neurodivergent. She really shines through as like navigating him through his troubled times in the face of his environmental anxiety and activism.
Definitely.
And similarly, Principal, apologies if I pronounce his name wrong, Principal Gautama at Pathashala. I'm probably pronouncing his names terribly. Sorry, guys. He seems like a seminal mentor in Yuvan's educational journey as a naturalist. And in his acknowledgements, Yuvan thanks various other mentors for their guidance and encouragement. But I think most poignantly, he singles out his mother as the sole person who's always been there to support him. So obviously, these people are looming big in these guys' lives. And as you said, Yuvan really interestingly takes on the role of teacher-learner at Pathashala, which is a really interesting concept to me. It's not something that we have here, and I think that's a brilliant idea. Dara similarly starts an eco group when he moves schools to inform and inspire his other students. I love the circularity of that. I think it shows how self-aware young environmentalists are in terms of getting their message out there to their peers and encouraging the succeeding generations.
Definitely, yeah. And the thing that you mentioned about the teacher learner role, that's quite unusual here in India as well. But Yuvan still manages to do his magic, I suppose, and he credits his mother in a lot of, like. So I've also had an opportunity to interview him as a part of the Heritage Project, and one of the initial things that he starts off is with the role of his mother and how she let him do his thing while also being quite observant about things. And it's very similar to Dara, which I think Sakshi will also touch upon. So I think the role of the mother and like mentors and other people situated around the system is like, it quite comes off, and they themselves, I think, are very, very like, they're very aware of these elements, and they keep slipping it in wherever possible, which is a very kind thing to do, in terms of acknowledging that you need support and I have support, and I'm going to provide the support to others as well. Yeah. Yes, Sakshi.
Yeah, I think parents and the larger cultural ecosystem that we're embedded in offers a sort of safe space for us to develop whatever inclinations we already have. But I think it's a little bit different for Dara and Yuvan, and perhaps me, because Yuvan and I come from a developing country, and that sort of defines the positionality of our parents with regards to the climate crisis. So, for instance, my parents didn't have the bandwidth to invest in the global environmentalist movement because of the more immediate economic realities of their world. And I think that capitalism and the empire has a role to play in this. But without getting into all of that, I just want to say that not a lot of us, definitely not me. I have not been raised to be a radical environmentalist. But my mother says a deep involvement and profound connection with nature that's almost spiritual. Because in Bombay, we don't have a lot of space, so we don't have yards and gardens, but we do have small balconies, and my balcony is full of plants that my mom has potted, and she is deeply attentive to the needs of every plant. And similarly, my grandparents, with whom I'm very close, have led very simple lives that have existed in a sort of symbiotic relationship with nature. And all of this has happened even before words like sustainability were coined, or before anthropological studies on, indigenous practices
Yeah,
related to nature were
absolutely
published.
right.
So yeah, so I've not been involved with the politics of environmentalism much, but from my parents, I've learned to value natural life at a more instinctive, human rooted level. And so our brands of environmentalisms may be very different, but I think um, we learn from our parents' practices. And I think there's a lot of beauty and a lot of value in looking at our ancestral inheritances for ways to, live with and live for nature. And it's very fulfilling because it, I think, connects you to your literal and your metaphorical roots. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely true. Too. Like we learn from what we see, and that's exhibited quite well in both of these authors and their work and their actions, more importantly. And in case of Dara, we're able to see how other siblings of his also are similarly neurodivergent, and they're trying to understand how others perceive the world, like his father. And in a way, their description or his description of his father is also similar to how he describes other species. He's trying to understand and observe and dissect things. So, and Yuvan does something similar also when he's trying to understand the mindsets of people who don't quite understand why it's important to give space to nature, and nature and humans are not quite different, and there's a lot of interconnectedness. Um, and from that, what or how do you think you in your personal lives can probably function not as not probably like maybe or maybe not parents or mentors or enablers in the sense that both of the authors have experienced, but then to some extent that is possible for us. And I think this is a question that I'm asking so that anyone that's listening can also be like, oh yeah, these are a couple of things that probably I can do or try out. So, what would be both of your, or are there certain things that you think you can be a part of, or initiate, or teach others in terms of like the climate crisis that's happening and the vulnerabilities of existing in the Anthropocene?
I guess I've been thinking more about trying to introduce this into my writing as part of my MA. A lot of the time, I mean, I can't help but be inspired by the nature that's around me here. I guess I'm lucky to have it, but sometimes I take it for granted, which I shouldn't. So I have it as a setting for a lot of my writing, but it's not really a theme. So I think I'm more inspired to try and get some of these messages across in my writing, rather than just having things set in nature and inspired by nature, to actually discuss some of these weightier topics. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's my little way of trying to potentially add to the momentum of activism. So far, I've been very passive in that. I've just observed. So yeah, I think these guys have really inspired me to be a little bit more active in that, especially in my nature writing, to become a little bit more, not political, but a little bit more active, and address things and illuminate things for young readers, things that they may not come across otherwise. Um, Especially, I write a lot of verse for early readers, so I think it'd be nice to try and get some of these messages across to that age group, and educate them at an early age as well. And quite often, I try to use humor in my writing. So I think Yuvan has shown me that you can still be informative and you can still get your message across and be funny at the same time, and be entertaining, and be a bit of a storyteller. So um, I think that's probably the biggest thing I'm going to take away from this, is that inspiration to try and put that into my writing.
Yeah, that's quite apt because I think the age group, like you have to catch them young to like inspire people, or to get them curious or interested or invested in the environment. And I think, if I'm not wrong, each of us were also influenced or started to get influenced at the similar age. So I think catering to that age group is something that will really catch us. And I think even when you're older and you read books which are written for young people, like how we have done now, it's still going to strike very, very similar chords. So I think that that's a wonderful way of going about it. Like, are there certain similar things that you want to add, Sakshi?
Yeah, like I said before, I think narratives are their own form of activism, and I think that's something that's really important to me as a person. And I think reading and experiencing nature, reading about and experiencing nature, can influence you at a personal level in a way that perhaps other things don't. And I do believe that you have to be a good person, you have to be a compassionate person to be a naturalist or to be an environmentalist. And that requires deep, deep, deep introspection. And I think that can be facilitated by sharing and, discussing all of these narratives and, of course, experiencing the healing powers of nature. So I don't know if I was very articulate with that, but
Yeah, I think we in a way could understand what you're trying to say. Like we could feel it, I guess. Right. And sometime before we touched upon the bit about relating to the content, even if we have not quite seen or felt the same things that the author wonderfully describes.
yeah,
So if we are extending it to your specific peers, people from your geographical regions, your be it your province or state or country, what are the ways in which do each of you think that readers from your part of the world will be able to relate to these stories? So if Yuvan's book was read by people from other departments, not necessarily belonging to nature writing, but maybe STEM students coming from the UK and or Ireland, and similarly Sakshi, if like doctors or lawyers, students who are studying to be trained to become lawyers and doctors, or even younger kids, because the books cater to them, are reading Dara's book, would would they be able to relate to it? What do you think?
Um, I think I touched on it before. Just I think there's a
Mhm.
universal appeal in
Yeah.
both these books. Um, there's the local appeal of being able to relate to the nature that's around you when it's described and explained and enthused over. And there's also the discovery of new and exciting species, which is really appealing as well to anyone. Um, I mean, I find that probably more exciting when I was reading Yuvan's book because many of the creatures were unknown to me. So, despite not knowing them, I could really relate to the curiosity and wonder Yuvan describes them with when he's describing their behaviors and how they look and how they interact with the landscape. Um, and I thought Yuvan's wealth of knowledge and his endearing and humorous anecdotal kind of writing style, um, it kind of blurred the lines nicely between nonfiction and storytelling because he's a great storyteller, but the stories are real. Um, I think most of us have stories and memories of nature experiences, so I mean that just makes it very relatable to any reader. I think. Um, Also, I suppose as well, these are two young voices. Probably more so Dara being, I think I said 14, 15 when he wrote this. So
14.
and
Yeah.
Yuvan, like early 20s, that's a very young POV for your reader. So that's relatable in itself because it's one of your peers talking to you in a way. I think just to touch quickly on Dara's book, Dara writes very candidly about his neurodivergence and his depression and moving house and being bullied and all these other kind of teenage experiences that all teenagers, well, maybe not all teenagers, but a lot of teenagers will have those experiences. So that's inherently relatable as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the angst or the experiences or the awkwardness or the growing up, that's same no matter where you are, I suppose. That's an
Yeah.
interesting way to look about it. Yeah, right. Yeah, yes, actually.
Yeah, so I hesitate to generalize because India is so diverse in every sense of the word, and there's, a multiplicity of socioeconomic classes, religions, cultural practices, geographical backgrounds, and so much more in this country. So, how really equipped am I to talk on behalf of someone else? But
Fair-
like we extensively, sorry, what?
No, no, I just said fair enough.
Yeah, but I think I agree with John, and I think we both talked about this before. And there is a certain universality to this. There is a certain feeling of solidarity and intimacy with nature, of seeking companionship with nature, of loneliness and solitude, and how that how the human condition and yeah how the human condition affects our relationship with nature, that stays the same across backgrounds and leanings and whatever baggages, individual baggages that we may come through. And I, for instance, live in a very densely crowded urban space, and I have to content myself with snatches of natural beauty that I see passingly.
Yeah,
And that might perhaps be true for the class of people that you described in your question. but but yeah, there are transformative and really heartwarming moments that you do experience with nature, that serve to sort of give you some sort of window into what a really truly immersive life with nature can be. Yeah.
yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So, so to this collection of books that you've read of an author coming from another region, if we were to ask you what books you would like to recommend to someone else from the UK or India, what would say Sakshi's list be, and followed by Sakshi, what would John's list be? What are the books on environment or books under the category of environmental writing or literature from your specific countries that you would like to recommend for us?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a long list. Apart from the two books that I mentioned in my first question, the first one is this. This is Shubhangi Swaroop's Latitudes of Longing, and it's as experimental in its form as it is in its content, and it weaves together stories of a very diverse group of people. So there's a couple in the untouched islands of Andaman. There is a man in the rugged terrains of the Himalayas. There's a girl living along the Irrawaddy fault line, and there's an old man who's the head of a nationless province with a very harsh climate. There's a political prisoner who becomes a poet after seeing the spirit of the ancient Tethys Sea. And these stories, like our human lives, intersect in very unexpected and very beautiful ways. And I think Swaroop does a great job of highlighting the connections between storytelling, narrativization, and the environment and human life. And I've read this multiple times, and it I just never tire of it. I also really like Janice Parat's short story collection, Boats on Land, which explores the connections between colonialism, capitalism, and the indigenous connection to the environment, specifically in the lush northeast Indian regions of India. And I also really like her novel, Everything the Light Touches, but I won't talk about that. Um, so then you might have heard of this, and I feel like other people on literature across borders must have recommended this as well. But this is The Hungry Tide by Amitav Ghosh. I swear to God, this man deserves to receive the Nobel Prize. Someone needs to do this. But yeah, so this explores the story of a dolphin researcher and a local fisherman and a businessman as they intersect in the very precarious and very vulnerable environmental region in East India, which is the Sundarbans, the mangrove ecosystem of the Sundarbans. So it's a fat book, but it's totally worth it. Then I have this collection of letters by Rabindranath Tagore, and this was published in his lifetime as Glimpses of Bengal. But this is like the fuller, more fleshed out version of it. And this is a collection of letters that he sent from 1887 to 1895 to his niece Indira Devi, and he describes the lush landscape of the Bengal region, with its, especially rural Bengal, with all of its rivers and rice fields and just so much more. It's so heartwarming to read, and these are also reflections of a poet, so they're inherently very poetic and lyrical. And finally, I have this. This is Monsoon by Vimla Devi. This is a collection of short stories that is set in Goa, which has a very specific and um, yeah, it has a very specific cultural connotation. And all of these stories sort of describe the intimate relationship that the locals have with their landscapes, such that the environmental aspect of it never overwhelms the stories themselves, but it's so normal. That connection is so everyday for them that it doesn't have to be emphasized. So I think the natural elements in the stories are woven it so delicately and so beautifully that I think everyone needs to read this. Yeah, sorry, that was really long.
No, I mean, thank you so much for very, very nicely describing all of these things. I think it is quite inspiring, and lots of people are going to read these books thanks to you. And I think like plus one on what you said about Amitav Ghosh, because that book was one of the main texts that inspired me and my team to head to Sundarbans to work on a documentary to talk about the natural heritage of this space. So their writing, I think, is quite moving, and you can feel a lot of these things. So thank you again so much for the list, and I'm excited to listen to John's list as well.
That was brilliant, Sakshi. I am going to be buying a lot of books after your recommendations. They all sound fantastic. Um, I guess to start off with, I guess I kind of have to mention Dara's next book, Wild Child, A Journey Through Nature. It's a lovely introduction to nature for younger, early readers, and it's full of Dara's exciting prose and Irish charm. Um, I particularly liked the accompanying illustrations by Barry Falls, which really set it alive visually for a young reader and would be naturalist. And I don't think I can mention illustrated naturalist books without referring to Robert McFarlane's Lost Words, which is a book which was, I think it was discussed in one of the other literature across borders groups. It's full of enchanting verse and beautiful illustrations by Jackie Morris. And I think Robert's also someone Yuvan and Dara have alluded to as an influence.
Yeah.
In fact, if I can just show you one of the illustrations, they're just gorgeous individual pieces of art. See this? This is two otters.
Wow.
That's,
Oh, wow.
the book's just full of those kind of like large, colorful illustrations, which I think will really engage with young readers. Another lovely wee illustrated nature book is Nicola Davis, A First Book of Nature. My nephews have recommended this to me. They're 4 and 6, so it's for a younger audience, obviously. It's another lyrical text combined with great illustrations again. I can't remember the illustrator's name, unfortunately, but it's a lovely lead into a child's first experience of nature. My youngest nephew was inspired to go out and look for these creatures that were described in the book, so it definitely worked for him. And last year, one of the books I had to read for our MA was Hannah Gould's middle grade story, The Last Bear. It's a classic trope of a child bonding with an animal, and it's really well done and highlights the plight of the polar bear as the ice caps recede due to climate change. And last but not least, a quick mention for Julia Green's middle grade book, The Wilderness War. It's a lovely story about a group of urban children taking ownership of their neighborhood's green space and fighting to save it. Great book.
Lovely, amazing. I love all of the suggestions, and I think once the transcripts are ready, I'm just going to get the books and also recommend it to our libraries where we are from, and all of these books I'm sure are quite inspiring, very much like our authors, and And I think this is a point that both of you have also made, like picking some of the qualities of the authors and then trying to see how we can incorporate it in our writing or in our lives, be it in terms of the practices or even the principles, if not the practices, because of the existing differences that we have. But like the similarity is the one that we want to focus on, is to try and see how we can get the points across and also convey to the people that interconnectedness is really much more important than the differences that exist. And so, in that sense, what would you say are some of the qualities of the authors that one can learn from, specifically when it comes to appreciating the environment around us? And if I were to phrase it or frame it in a little bit of a different way, if each of you were representatives of the authors that whose books that you read, how would you interact, say, with each other? What types of questions you would ask each other? Probably, I
Oh,
think we can make this into like two separate questions, one with respect to the qualities and the other with respect to how you would function as their representatives, because we have been inspired by the authors while
yeah.
reading the books. Yeah.
Um, I guess qualities wise, the awe, curiosity, and reverence which both authors approach the natural
Yeah.
world with. That's such a beautiful thing. And also taking time and patience to be still in nature and observe. Like the modern world is so fast, we rush past all these things and don't observe and don't notice.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a quality they both like. I think I remember Yuvan um, trying to watch some butterflies mate, and he had a group of students with him, and one by one they all left because they got bored, but he stayed there to the end and observed. So it's just, I suppose it's just the dedication and patience to be still and to observe what's around you. Finding the joy in those small things as well. Like I think Dara actually talks about lying on the ground to observe
Mhm.
some little creatures, like kind of um, putting a microscope down to what's around you. And again, I suppose fighting for those things as well, like eco activism too, not just observing, but trying to protect and conserve and get your message out there too, as Yuvan does as well. Um, in terms of questions for, um, I suppose if I was thinking like Yuvan, I would maybe be asking something like, are you able to make time in your day to stop and experience and appreciate the nature around you and enjoy it? And also maybe what can you do to help protect that nature that is around you?
Yeah, yeah, I think those make sense. And in terms of the qualities, be it activism or patience, reverence, and curiosity, they are quite essential. And with patience, I think I was also reminded of one of the other incidents that Yuvan writes about when there's a snake that gets into one of their washrooms and it goes inside the sink. And they remove it, waiting for the snake to come out. But then the plumber comes after like 3 4 hours after they've broken the sink trying to get the snake out, where he says there's another exit and the snake's just gone out. So they were just sitting there for 4 hours waiting next to an empty sink, waiting for a snake to come out. But I'm sure they didn't quite regret it. It's probably the school's principal would have regretted it. But then that patience is quite paramount then. Um, and similarly, if you were to point out or talk about a few things in terms of Dara's qualities, Sakshi.
Yeah, I think definitely Dara's attentiveness to the world around him is something that I would like to emulate. And I think it takes a lot to come out of your own head and your own ego-centric thoughts to really, really observe the natural world around you. And I think Mary Oliver says this, that, attention is the beginning of devotion. And it's only when I, really attentively look at the leaves, flowers, the foliage, the small insects around me, that I'm really able to revel in their beauty, and that is that is when I'm able to feel this sense of commitment to the environmental cause. And no amount of engaging with eco-critical theory can, replace this experience for me. And I think that the way inward can often come through the way outward, and that nature can become a catalyst for deep reflection and introspection and even spiritual epiphany. And I think Dara really embodies that. And if if I could be, even half as attentive as him, I think I'd be a better person and a better environmentalist. And in terms of the things I'd like to ask him, I would definitely ask him how he tunes out the noises of the world around and tunes into the sounds of nature, and often the very articulate silences of nature as well. And I would also
Mhm.
like to ask him, did you think while writing this book that language fell short to articulate your experiences with nature? And if it did, how did you work your way around it? Because this is something that, and maybe this is something and that John can also shed light on, because he writes about nature.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I,
Thank you.
I think I might have misinterpreted the question there. I was thinking, what questions would the author ask us? But yeah, if it's what questions we would
Yeah,
we ask?
that was the question. But I think both the questions, now
Oh yeah,
that after
sorry.
successes, I was like, oh, that's an interesting question too. So I guess we can still do that. So if Sakshi were to ask questions as a representative of Dara to John, who is representing Yuvan, then what questions would Dara be asking
Oh
Yuvan?
no,
Is
I
something
totally
that
missed
I
it.
would like to listen from Sakshi. And similarly, John, if you were to ask something to Yuvan, because there's a lot of similarities and differences.
To you. Do you want to go first, Sakshi, or shall I?
Wait, I'm still confused. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to ask a
Back?
question as Dara's representative to Yuvan. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So you, as Tara's representative, are asking questions to John, who is Yuvan's representative. So that's the thing for you. And similarly, John, like if you were to ask questions to Yuvan, I think both the questions are like very interesting to see where it will
Um,
go to. Any of you can start.
well, I suppose just to switch mine around, if I could ask Yuvan questions, I suppose I would ask, um, what does he see as the way ahead for activism in India? Um, he sort of he touches on it a little in the book, and possibly in his following works. There's more on it. I haven't read his following
Right.
works,
Yeah, yeah,
but I'm just
yeah.
really interested to know what he would like to see happen in India in terms of
Mhm.
conservation and addressing climate change. That would be really interesting to know his thoughts on that.
Yeah. That's I think he would love to answer that question also. Right. Thank you. And what questions do you have, Sakshi?
Yeah, I think this, what I said before about language and how language can be made to address this question, and what kind of language is appropriate, and how do you how do you put into language an experience that might be outside it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I probably we'll have to send these questions to each of them because I think they would really have already thought about these things. So their perspective on these things would be fascinating to know about. I think we're
Definitely.
right now coming a little towards the end of the session, where for so far, at least for the past couple of questions or 10-15 minutes, we've been speaking about how we've been inspired by them, what are some of their qualities we would like to imbibe or um, share with others. So then if we just get our hands dirty and focus on the actual books and the pieces and the words and verses that they've written, would it be okay if both of you read some of your favorite bits of writing from the books? So I
I'd
guess
love to.
we can start with John and then with Sakshi. And if you can also start by saying the name of the book and the author and then go to the piece, that would be brilliant.
Sure, I'd love to. So obviously, this is a naturalist journal by Yuvan, and I am going to read from um, another sketch of a ruler, an essay on the Indian ruler. But by end of March, as the summer heat sets, this bird is affected by the moods of romance. It renounces its silence and bursts into song with its bad voice. The male starts its courting display early in the day, flying to a high point and then looping hysterical mid-air hyperbolas. A feat quite entertaining if they weren't accompanied by prolonged deep-throated screeches with accents and crescendos, like as if the devil himself was after it. This is the alter ego of the bird. The female scrutinizes from a distance, I should assume. But which lady would be attracted to such maniacal demonstrations? Like an ill omen, and would want a man showing all the extreme symptoms of non compos mentis. I have come across miners, crows, and other fellow birds sit by with a look of great revulsion, listening to the displaying ruler. After a point, when their thresholds of tolerance have spilled over, they fly up and chase the ruler out of earshot. You will especially feel grateful towards them for this action in case a ruler was going on right outside your room, even before you were out of bed. And may the gods forbid the scenario of when two male rulers are displaying within each other's earshot. Each will scream louder and louder with each loop and will go on tirelessly attempting to outcompete each other. And I also have a few quotes from the book as well. These are a few little quotes um, in relation to nettle moth caterpillars. This is how Yuvan describes them. They are fatter than they are long and have the merest vestiges of legs, or rather mild bumps beneath them, making each one look like a cross between a slug and a marshmallow. And then another description of the teak defoliator caterpillar. If subjected to any more trouble, the critter frantically crawls to the leaf's edge and jumps off and commits suicide. Not really. It hides itself in the leaf litter for a while and climbs back up again. I picked those two because I just loved his humor. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Thank you so much for the quotes and the excerpt that you read.
Oh,
Now,
very
can
lovely,
we,
thoroughly enjoyable.
yes,
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just reading this out. As I stood there in the oh wait, I need to say the name first. This is the Diary of a Young Naturalist by Dara McAnulty, and I'm reading an excerpt from it. It goes, as I stood there in the rain, fluffed up sparrows in conversation among themselves, there was a spark. Noticing nature is the start of it all. Slowing down to listen, to watch. Taking the time despite mountains of homework. Making a space and time to stop and stare, as the Welsh poet W.H. Davies wrote in Leisure. What is life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. No time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep and cows. No time to see when woods we pass where squirrels hide their nuts in grass. I don't see it as leisure though. This is good work, hard work. Taking the time to observe nature, to immerse oneself in its patterns, structures, happenings, and rhythms. It's how mathematicians and scientists are nurtured. Alan Turing studied the patterns in nature, the spherical organization of cells in an embryo, the arrangement of petals on a flower, the waves on a sand dune, spots on a leopard, the stripes on a zebra. He was looking for a mathematical formula for the development of cells in living things. He called it the reaction diffusion system, the transformation of pattern into stimulating reactions, the complexity of it. There's no way I can interpret his theory at the moment, but it was contemplating nature that inspired him in his ideas. Nature sparks creativity. All we have to do is start with the question why. The way my mind whirs and whirls in nature, or even when daydreaming, is way more productive than the work I do in school.
Thank you, Sakshi. And I remember reading that section. So it was really nice
Yeah.
revisiting that book. So
Yeah,
thank you,
it was
Shima.
so soulful and heartwarming.
Yeah, very rightly said. Thank you again to the both of you for very, very beautifully just articulating the points that you felt, and that you've also, because you've also put a lot of thought into the sections of the books that you've read, and also in your personal lives as people who enjoy eco criticism and environmental writing and understanding and sharing of points. So it was really fascinating, and also in a lot of sections um, mind blowing to see how your understanding of certain things are similar but also different. And in a sense, I think all of us could also connect in those terms, even if the books or the points that we're talking about are of different things, but they're not really of different things. So I learned quite a bit from all of your thoughts that you shared and your takeaways. So that is something that I quite enjoyed and appreciate, and I'm thankful for. And if there are any other points that both of you would like to add in terms of your texts or each other's texts, or any other interesting takeaways from what each other said, please do so.
I'd just like to say thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you, Dharani and Sakshi. It's been a pleasure chatting with you both, and um, I can relate to so much of what Sakshi was saying. It's just like yeah, we're apart, but we're together. Everyone's just got that connection through nature. I think so. It's been really cool experience.
Yeah,
Likewise, John, it's been wonderful talking to you, and you, Dharani. It was really nice.
wonderful. Thank you so much both for your time, and special thanks for your lists of recommendations. That is something I'm very much looking forward to.
No, thank you so much. It's been such an enlightening, interesting conversation. And really, thank you for taking out the time for this. It really means a lot.